Harper Williams stood in the doorway of her late grandmother's Victorian home in Salem, Massachusetts. The October air carried a damp chill that seemed to penetrate her wool coat as she fumbled with the antique key. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away 3 weeks ago at the age of 93, leaving Harper with a house full of memories and mysteries. "Need a hand with those boxes?" called Martin, her husband, from the car. "No, I've got it," Harper replied, finally pushing the door open. The familiar scent of old books and lavender welcomed her as she stepped inside. Nothing had changed since her last visit 6 months ago. The same creaking floorboards, the same faded wallpaper, the same grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the hallway. Harper had always been close to her grandmother, especially after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Eleanor had raised her, nurturing Harper's interest in photography and darkroom techniques in an age when digital had largely replaced film. Now at 32, Harper worked as a photo restoration specialist at the Boston Historical Society, a career inspired by the hours spent in Eleanor's makeshift darkroom in the basement. "So this is all yours now?" Martin asked, setting down their overnight bags in the foyer. His eyes roamed the ornate moldings and antique furniture. "Everything," Harper nodded, "including whatever's in the attic that Grandma never let me see." She smiled faintly. She always said it wasn't the right time. That evening, after a simple dinner of takeout from the local diner, Harper found herself drawn to the narrow staircase leading to the attic. With flashlight in hand, she ascended the creaking steps while Martin settled in with a book downstairs. The attic was exactly as she had imagined, dusty, cramped, and filled with relics of the past. Old furniture draped in sheets, trunks bound with leather straps, and stacks of yellowed newspapers lined the walls. In the corner stood an ornate dresser with a padlock securing its top drawer. Harper's flashlight beam caught the glint of a small brass key hanging from a nail beside the dresser. It fit perfectly into the padlock. Inside the drawer, she found a leather-bound journal and a collection of photographs wrapped in acid-free paper. The journal belonged to her great-grandfather, Edward Williams, photographer who had documented life in Salem during the early 1900s. The photographs were his work portraits of solemn families, landscapes of old Salem, and buildings long since demolished. But one photograph made Harper's breath catch. It showed a man in a dark suit holding an infant. The image was badly deteriorated, the man's face obscured by water damage and the child's features blurry. Scrawled on the back in faded ink, "Thomas Holloway and daughter, 1924. As Harper studied the photograph, a note slipped out from between the pages of the journal. In her grandmother's handwriting it read, "Some photographs were never meant to be restored. Leave the past where it belongs." Harper frowned, tucking the photo and note into the journal. The warning only piqued her curiosity. After all, restoration was her profession, her passion. What harm could possibly come from bringing clarity to an old family photograph? Little did Harper know that her grandmother's warning would prove prophetic, and that the seemingly innocent image in her hands would soon unravel a dark history that had remained hidden for nearly a century. Harper's restoration workshop in the basement was exactly as her grandmother had left it. The red safe light cast an eerie glow over the enlarger, developing trays and bottles of chemicals meticulously arranged on metal shelves. Digital equipment shared space with analog tools, a perfect blend of old and new techniques that reflected Harper's approach to her craft. After breakfast the next morning, she descended into the familiar space, carrying the photograph of Thomas Holloway and his infant daughter. Martin had gone into town to buy groceries, leaving Harper alone with her project. "Let's see what you're hiding," she murmured to the damaged image as she carefully placed it on the light table. Under proper illumination, she could see that the deterioration was extensive, but not impossible to address. Water damage had created a milky veil over most of the photo, and mold had eaten away at one corner. Harper began by taking high-resolution scans, capturing every detail of the damaged photograph. As the image appeared on her computer screen, she leaned closer, noticing something odd about the baby's face. There was a strange distortion around the mouth area that didn't seem consistent with the typical water damage patterns. Probably just an artifact from the deterioration, she reasoned, beginning the painstaking digital restoration process. Hours passed as Harper worked, removing spots, adjusting contrasts, and reconstructing missing portions. She was so absorbed that she barely noticed when Martin returned and called down to her. "Harper, I picked up lunch from that cafe you like," he shouted from the top of the stairs. "Be right up," she replied, saving her progress. Over sandwiches, Martin asked about the photograph. "Found anything interesting in your grandmother's collections?" Harper described the Holloway photograph and her grandmother's warning note. "It's probably just Grandma being superstitious. You know how she was about certain family histories." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor never struck me as superstitious without reason. Maybe there's something to it. What could possibly be dangerous about restoring an old photograph? Harper laughed. At worst, I'll discover some forgotten family scandal. Maybe this Thomas Holloway was the black sheep of the family. After lunch, Harper returned to the basement, determined to make significant progress before evening. As she worked on the infant's face, slowly removing the layers of damage, she began to feel increasingly uneasy. Something about the emerging features seemed wrong. The baby's mouth was becoming clearer, but instead of the toothless gums of an infant, what appeared to be adult-like teeth were taking shape. Harper blinked hard, thinking it must be a trick of the light or a misinterpretation of the damage patterns. She adjusted her techniques, convinced she was inadvertently creating an optical illusion in the restoration process. Yet with each refinement, the unnatural feature became more distinct. The infant in the photograph appeared to have a full set of teeth, small but unmistakably adult-like, arranged in what could almost be described as a knowing smile. "This can't be right," Harper whispered, leaning back from her computer. A chill ran through her despite the warmth of the basement. She saved her work and decided to take a break, disturbed by the emerging image. As she stood to stretch, the red safe light flickered momentarily, and Harper could have sworn she heard a soft, gurgling laugh from somewhere in the shadows of the basement. She quickly glanced around but saw nothing unusual in the familiar space. Just my imagination, she told herself, but hurried up the stairs nonetheless, unable to shake the feeling that she was no longer alone in the workshop. That evening, Harper couldn't stop thinking about the strange photograph. Over dinner, she mentioned the disturbing details to Martin. "Teeth? In an infant?" Martin frowned, setting down his fork. "That doesn't make sense. Maybe it's just damage to the emulsion that looks like teeth." "Maybe," Harper conceded, "but I've restored hundreds of photographs, and I've never seen damage create such a specific illusion. It looks ... deliberate." After dinner, Harper opened her laptop and began researching Thomas Holloway. The Salem Historical Society's online archives yielded little information at first, but a search through digitized newspaper records from the 1920s proved more fruitful. Thomas Holloway had been a respected dentist in Salem during the early 1900s. Several articles mentioned his innovative techniques and his prestigious practice on Essex Street. There was a wedding announcement from 1922 when he married Catherine Blackwood, daughter of a prominent Salem family. And then in November 1924, a small obituary, tragic loss for Holloway family. It reported that Catherine Holloway had died from complications following childbirth. The infant, named Elizabeth, had survived. Harper dug deeper, searching for any information about Elizabeth Holloway. A school record from 1930 showed she attended Salem Elementary, but after that, the trail went cold. There was no death certificate, no marriage record, nothing to indicate what had become of her. "Find anything?" Martin asked, peering over her shoulder. "Nothing conclusive," Harper replied. "Thomas was a dentist, which is an odd coincidence given what I'm seeing in the photo. His wife died in childbirth, and their daughter seems to disappear from records after elementary school." Martin squeezed her shoulder. "Small towns have a way of losing records, especially from that era. Maybe they moved away." Harper nodded, but something didn't feel right. She returned to her grandmother's journal, flipping through the pages for any mention of the Holloways. Near the back, she found a brief entry dated August 17, 1962. "Eleanor came asking about the Holloway photograph today. I told her what my father told me, that some family histories should remain buried. The photograph stays locked away." Below this entry was another, written in a shaky hand that Harper recognized as her grandmother's. Grandfather was right. "I found the photograph and saw what happened when the restoration was attempted in 1958. Never again. The child with the unnatural smile brings only sorrow." Harper's skin prickled. Someone had tried to restore the photograph before, in 1958, and something had happened, something that had frightened her grandmother, enough to lock the photograph away and warn against future restoration attempts. "Martin," she called, "I think I need to visit the Salem Historical Society tomorrow. There's more to this story than what's available online." That night, Harper dreamed of a small girl with perfectly formed adult teeth, smiling at her from the foot of her bed. The child's voice was like the rustling of dry leaves as she whispered, "Why did you wake me up, Harper? I was sleeping so peacefully in the dark." Harper jolted awake at 3:17 a.m., her heart racing. The bedroom was empty except for Martin sleeping soundly beside her, but as she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Tiny, wet footprints on the hardwood floor leading from the door to the bed and back again. By morning, the footprints had vanished, leaving Harper to wonder if they had ever been there at all. The Salem Historical Society occupied a stately Federal-style building on Washington Square. Harper had visited many times for work, but today she was here on a personal mission. Martin had opted to stay at the house, continuing to sort through Eleanor's belongings. Miss Abigail Pierce, the Society's archivist for over 30 years, greeted Harper warmly. "Harper, dear, I was so sorry to hear about Eleanor. She was a remarkable woman." "Thank you, Miss Pierce. Actually, I'm here because of something I found among her belongings." Harper explained about the photograph and her research so far, carefully omitting the disturbing details of the restoration and her unsettling dream. Miss Pierce's expression grew serious. "The Holloway case. I'm surprised Eleanor kept that photograph." "You know about it?" Harper asked, surprised. The archivist nodded slowly. "Come with me." She led Harper to a secure room at the back of the building where the most delicate and valuable archives were kept. After entering a code on a keypad, she ushered Harper inside. In 1958, a researcher named Daniel Phillips came to study Salem's photographic history. Miss Pierce explained as she searched through a filing cabinet. "He found references to your great-grandfather's work, including a mention of the Holloway portraits. He became obsessed with finding and restoring them." She pulled out a thin file labeled Phillips Research, Restricted. "Eleanor never told you about this because she was trying to protect you." Daniel Phillips was found dead in his darkroom 3 days after beginning restoration work on the Holloway photograph. The official cause was accidental poisoning from photographic chemicals, but you don't believe that," Harper finished. The police report noted some unusual details. Phillips' body was found with an expression of extreme terror. His mouth was damaged as if he had tried to remove his own teeth, and written on the darkroom wall in developer fluid were the words, "She's smiling inside me." Harper felt a chill run through her. What happened to his restoration work? Destroyed in a small fire that broke out in the darkroom. The original photograph was returned to Eleanor, who promptly locked it away. "She made me promise never to speak of it again." Miss Pierce fixed Harper with a stern gaze. "Harper, whatever you're doing with that photograph, I strongly advise you to stop." Harper left the Historical Society with more questions than answers, her mind racing. As she walked back to her grandmother's house, she passed by 317 Essex Street, the address listed for Thomas Holloway's dental practice in the 1920s. The building now housed a boutique clothing store, its historic facade preserved but its interior completely modernized. On impulse, Harper entered the store and approached the young woman behind the counter. "This might sound strange, but do you know anything about the history of this building? Specifically about a dentist named Thomas Holloway who practiced here in the 1920s? The clerk shook her head, but an elderly customer browsing nearby looked up sharply. "Holloway?" the woman said, approaching them. "I haven't heard that name in years. My mother used to scare me with stories about Dr. Teeth and his demon child." Harper's pulse quickened. "Dr. Teeth? Just old Salem folklore," the woman explained. Thomas Holloway was a dentist who supposedly experimented on his patients. When his wife died giving birth, rumors spread that the baby was born with a full set of adult teeth. Some said he had conducted experiments on his pregnant wife. She shrugged. "Just ghost stories to frighten children away from the dentist, I'm sure." Harper thanked the woman and continued home, her unease growing with each step. The story matched too perfectly with what she had seen in the restoration process. As she rounded the corner onto her grandmother's street, her phone rang. It was Martin. "Harper, you need to come home now," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Something's happening with your computer in the basement. The restoration program is running by itself, and you need to see this." Harper rushed home, her mind racing with possibilities. Had she accidentally left the restoration program running? Had Martin started it by mistake? Neither explanation seemed plausible, but they were preferable to the alternative, that something supernatural was at work. She found Martin standing at the top of the basement stairs, reluctant to go down. "It started about an hour ago," he explained. "I heard the printer running, and when I checked, your computer was on, cycling through different versions of the restoration. Together they descended into the basement." Harper's workstation was illuminated by the blue glow of her monitor, which displayed the Holloway photograph. The restoration software was indeed running automatically, making adjustments to the image without any user input. As they watched, the infant's face became clearer with each iteration. The unnatural teeth were now unmistakable. Small but perfectly formed adult teeth arranged in a wide smile. But more disturbing was the look in the baby's eyes, which now appeared sharply focused and aware, gazing directly at the camera with an intelligence no infant should possess. "This isn't possible," Harper whispered, moving to shut down the computer. But before she could touch the keyboard, the printer whirred to life again, spitting out a copy of the latest restoration iteration. Martin picked up the print, then immediately dropped it with a gasp. "It's wet," he said, showing Harper his fingertips, which were stained with what looked like saliva. Harper carefully lifted the print with a pair of archival gloves. The image had changed again. Now the man holding the infant, Thomas Holloway, was looking down at the child with an expression of horror that hadn't been visible in earlier versions. "We need to stop this," Martin said firmly. "Whatever's happening isn't normal." "Your grandmother was right. Some photographs shouldn't be restored." Harper nodded, reaching for the computer's power button. As she did, the image on screen changed once more. Infant's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide for a baby, revealing row upon row of teeth receding into darkness. Harper slammed the power button, and the computer shut down. The sudden silence in the basement was broken only by their rapid breathing. "Let's get out of here," Martin suggested, already moving toward the stairs. As they reached the main floor, Harper's phone chimed with a text message notification. It was from an unknown number and contained only 6 words. "Why did you wake me up?" Harper showed the message to Martin, her hands shaking. "We're leaving," he decided. "Pack what you need. We'll stay at a hotel tonight and figure this out tomorrow." But as Martin went upstairs to pack, Harper found herself drawn back to her grandmother's journal. There had to be more information, some explanation for what was happening. She flipped through the pages frantically until she found another entry she hadn't noticed before. Dated October 31st, 1962. All Hallows. Eve. "The boundary between worlds is thinnest tonight. I performed the ritual as instructed, using the silver mirror and the blessed candles. The child's spirit resisted, but in the end I bound it back to the photograph using the original negative as a vessel. As long as the image remains damaged and unviewable, Elizabeth Holloway will sleep. God forgive me for what I've done, but there was no other way to save my family." Harper stared at the entry, a chill spreading through her. The original negative, that was the key. She needed to find it before they left. She was about to call out to Martin when she heard a soft thud from upstairs, followed by silence. "Martin?" she called, moving toward the staircase. No response. With growing dread, Harper climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Martin lying on the floor, unconscious. She rushed to his side, relieved to find him breathing. As she gently patted his cheek, trying to wake him, she noticed something on the dresser mirror. Written in what looked like condensation were the words, "Find me." Martin groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Something hit me," he mumbled, touching the back of his head. Harper helped him sit up, explaining what she had discovered in the journal. "We need to find the original negative. That's what my grandmother used to bind. Whatever this is, where would it be?" Martin asked, still dazed. "If I were hiding something that dangerous," Harper reasoned, "I'd keep it close, somewhere I could monitor it." Realization dawned on both of them simultaneously. The grandfather clock, they said in unison. The antique clock in the hallway had always been Eleanor's prized possession. She wound it religiously every week and forbade anyone else from touching it. Together they went to the clock, carefully opening the lower cabinet where the pendulum swung. Behind it was a small compartment, and inside that a lead box sealed with wax. Harper broke the seal and opened the box. Inside lay a glass negative plate wrapped in black cloth. Even through the wrapping she could feel a strange coldness emanating from it. "Now what?" Martin asked, keeping his distance from the negative. "Now," Harper said grimly, "we find out what my grandmother did to put Elizabeth Holloway to sleep, and we do it again." Night had fallen by the time Harper finished deciphering her grandmother's cryptic notes about the binding ritual. The journal contained references to books in Eleanor's library, and after hours of searching, Harper had pieced together the procedure. "It has to be performed at 3:17 a.m., she explained to Martin as they set up in the living room. "That's when Elizabeth died in 1936. "Died?" Martin looked up from arranging candles in the pattern Eleanor's notes had specified. "I thought she disappeared from records after elementary school." According to these newspaper clippings tucked into one of Grandma's books, Elizabeth Holloway died at age 12 under mysterious circumstances. The article doesn't go into detail, but there's a handwritten note from my grandmother saying she killed 3 children before her father finally ended her life. Martin's face paled. "And we've woken her up?" "Not completely," Harper said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The restoration process started to break the binding, but according to Grandma's notes, Elizabeth's spirit is still tethered to the photograph. She can't fully manifest until the restoration is complete." They worked in silence for a while, setting up the ritual components. A silver-backed mirror was placed facing the original negative, which they had carefully removed from its protective wrapping. 5 black candles formed a pentagram around these items, and a bowl of salt water sat at the center. "What exactly will this do?" Martin asked as they completed the preparations. "If I understand correctly, it will reverse the restoration process and reinforce the binding that keeps Elizabeth's spirit trapped in the negative." Harper checked her watch. 2:45 a.m. We have half an hour. They sat on the sofa, the tension between them palpable. The house seemed to hold its breath around them, the usual creaks and settling noises conspicuously absent. At 3:10, Harper's phone chimed with another text from the unknown number. "I'm coming upstairs." They both froze, listening intently. Sure enough, soft footsteps could be heard ascending from the basement, accompanied by a quiet humming, a child's voice singing an old lullaby. "She knows what we're doing," Harper whispered, gripping Martin's hand. And the footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs, then paused. The humming stopped, replaced by a child's giggle that somehow managed to sound both innocent and menacing. "It's time," Harper said, checking her watch. 3:16 a.m. She moved to the center of the ritual setup, carefully lifting the negative plate. According to Eleanor's notes, Harper needed to recite an incantation while holding the negative to the flame of the central candle, just enough to create smoke but not damage the emulsion. She began the Latin phrases, her voice shaking slightly. Martin stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. As the grandfather clock began to chime for 3:17, the living room temperature plummeted. Their breaths fogged in the suddenly frigid air, and the candle flames stretched tall and thin, burning blue instead of orange. Harper continued the incantation, holding the negative plate over the central candle. Smoke began to rise, smelling of chemicals and something else, something sweet and rotten like decaying flowers. The doorway to the hall darkened, and within that darkness 2 points of light appeared, eyes reflecting the candlelight. A small figure stood watching them, its features indistinct except for a wide, tooth-filled smile. "Keep going," Martin urged, his voice tight with fear. Harper forced herself to focus on the ritual, not the apparition in the doorway. As she spoke the final words, the negative in her hands grew unbearably cold, and the smoke curling from it formed intricate patterns in the air before being drawn into the silver mirror. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and for a moment, Harper could see a reflection that wasn't her own, a young girl in an old-fashioned dress, her face a twisted combination of infant and adult features, her mouth full of too many teeth. The figure in the doorway took a step forward, becoming more solid. It was indeed a child of about 12, wearing a dress from the 1930s. Her face was mostly in shadow, but that terrible smile gleamed in the candlelight. "You can't send me back," said Elizabeth Holloway, her voice simultaneously that of a child and something much older. "I've tasted freedom again. I've tasted him." She gestured toward Martin, who clutched his head in sudden pain. "The ritual isn't working," Harper realized with growing horror. "She's too strong now." Elizabeth took another step forward. "My father tried to fix me when I was born. He thought his dental experiments had created a monster." Her smile widened impossibly. "He was right." As she approached the edge of the candle arrangement, Harper had a sudden inspiration. The restored print, the one that had come out wet from the printer, might provide a stronger connection to Elizabeth than the negative alone. "Martin," she whispered urgently, "get the print from downstairs." Martin hesitated, looking at the child thing that stood between him and the basement door. "Go around through the kitchen," Harper instructed, continuing to hold the negative over the candle to maintain the partial binding. As Martin slipped away, Elizabeth's attention remained fixed on Harper. "You look like her, you know. Eleanor. She thought she could trap me forever." The child thing tilted her head at an unnatural angle. "But you let me out. You wanted to see my smile." Harper forced herself to remain calm, even as Elizabeth took another step closer. "Your father was Thomas Holloway, the dentist. What did he do to you?" A flicker of something, perhaps pain, crossed Elizabeth's face. "He made me perfect. Mother died bringing me into the world, and Father made sure her sacrifice wasn't wasted. Each tooth was a gift, you see, taken from his patients while they slept in his chair." The implications turned Harper's stomach, but she needed to keep Elizabeth talking until Martin returned. "He implanted teeth in your gums when you were an infant." Elizabeth nodded, seeming almost proud. 32 adult teeth plus 17 extra that he fitted into my palate and the back of my throat. My masterpiece, he called me. Her expression darkened until I started using them. Martin appeared in the doorway behind Elizabeth, holding the restored print. Harper gave him a subtle nod. "What happened to the children you killed?" Harper asked, maintaining eye contact with Elizabeth. "I was hungry," Elizabeth said simply. "Father couldn't understand that. He gave me all these beautiful teeth, but didn't want me to use them." Her smile returned, wider than humanly possible. "Just like you've restored me, but don't want me to be free." "Now, Martin," Harper shouted. Martin rushed forward, pressing the restored print against the negative in Harper's hands. Elizabeth shrieked, a sound that started as a child's cry and rose to an inhuman pitch that made the windows rattle. Harper completed the incantation, and this time, the smoke from the negative and print combined, swirling around Elizabeth's form. The child thing thrashed and clawed at the air as she was pulled toward the silver mirror. "You can't keep me locked away forever," Elizabeth screamed as her form distorted, stretching like taffy being pulled into the mirror's surface. "Someone will always want to see my smile." With a final, terrible wail, Elizabeth Holloway vanished into the mirror, which cracked from edge to edge with a sound like breaking ice. The restored print and negative in Harper's hands spontaneously blackened, as if exposed to intense light, leaving nothing but 2 squares of ruined photographic material. The candles guttered out simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness. Dawn found Harper and Martin exhausted but alive, sitting on the porch swing with mugs of strong coffee. Neither had been willing to remain inside the house after the night's events, but neither had wanted to leave entirely either. "Do you think it worked?" Martin asked, his voice hoarse from shouting during the ritual. Harper stared at the blackened remains of the photograph and negative, which she had placed in a silver box she'd found among her grandmother's possessions. "I think so. The ritual destroyed both the physical anchors tying Elizabeth to our world. What will you do with those?" Martin nodded toward the box. "Bury them. Separately. One here in the garden where Grandma can keep watch, and one ... double quotes." She paused, considering. "One somewhere far away. Maybe the ocean." They sat in silence for a while, watching the neighborhood come to life around them. Children waited for school buses, people walked dogs, mail carriers made their rounds, normal life continuing, oblivious to the horror that had nearly broken through into their world. "We should report what we found about Thomas Holloway," Martin suggested eventually. "If the stories are true, he murdered patients for their teeth and experimented on his own child." Harper nodded slowly. "We will, but carefully. I don't want to risk stirring up Elizabeth's spirit again by drawing too much attention to her story." Later that morning, they went back inside to pack their belongings. Harper had decided they would stay at a hotel for the remaining days of their visit, returning to the house only during daylight hours to sort through Eleanor's possessions. As Harper was gathering her restoration equipment from the basement, she noticed something odd about the computer monitor. Though the power was still off, a faint image seemed to be visible on the screen, the ghost of the Holloway photograph, with the infant's terrible smile just barely perceptible. She quickly covered the monitor with a cloth and unplugged the computer entirely, resolving to leave it behind when they returned to Boston. In the kitchen, Martin was boxing up the few groceries he had purchased. "I called a realtor," he told Harper. "They can handle selling the house once we've cleared out Eleanor's personal items. You don't think we should keep it?" Though she already knew the answer. Despite the childhood memories the house held, last night had tainted it irrevocably. Martin gave her a gentle look. "Do you really want to?" She shook her head. "No, but there's one more thing I need to do before we leave." That afternoon, they visited the Salem Historical Society. Ms. Pierce was surprised to see them, especially given Harper's pale, exhausted appearance. "We found something you should add to your restricted archives," Harper explained, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. Inside was a detailed account of what they had discovered about Thomas and Elizabeth Holloway, along with a warning about attempting to restore any photographs connected to them. "The original materials have been neutralized," Harper assured the archivist. "But if anyone ever discovers copies or related photographs, they need to know the danger." Ms. Pierce accepted the envelope with a solemn nod. "I'll make sure this information is properly archived and restricted." She studied Harper's face. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you've been through quite an ordeal." "We're fine," Harper said, forcing a smile. "Just ready to go home." As they left the Historical Society, Martin squeezed Harper's hand. "Is this really over?" Harper thought about the blackened photographs, one soon to be buried in Eleanor's garden and the other destined for the depths of the Atlantic. She thought about the warning now safely ensconced in the Historical Society's restricted archives. She thought about her decision to abandon restoration work, at least for a while. "Yes," she said with more conviction than she felt. "It's over." But that night, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Harper's phone chimed with a text message. When she checked the screen, she found only a single emoji from an unknown number, a grinning face. She deleted the message and turned off her phone, telling herself it was just a coincidence, a random spam text. But in her dreams, she heard the soft patter of small feet and the quiet humming of a lullaby that seemed to be coming from inside her own head. 3 months later, back in their Boston apartment, Harper was finally beginning to feel normal again. She had taken a leave of absence from the Historical Society, claiming she needed time to process her grandmother's death and settle her estate. In reality, she hadn't been able to face restoration work since the incident with the Holloway photograph. The house in Salem had sold quickly, despite Harper's concerns that Elizabeth's presence might somehow linger there. They had buried one set of the blackened photographic remains in Eleanor's garden before leaving, and Martin had accompanied Harper on a ferry trip where she had consigned the other set to the depths of Massachusetts Bay. On this particular January morning, Harper was sorting through the last of the boxes they had brought back from Salem, mostly books and small keepsakes she hadn't been able to part with. At the bottom of one box, she found a small leather pouch she didn't recognize. Inside was a tarnished silver pendant engraved with intricate symbols similar to those in Eleanor's ritual. A note in her grandmother's handwriting read, "For protection, wear it always." Harper slipped the chain over her head, feeling oddly comforted by the weight of the pendant against her skin. She had just closed the box when her phone rang, the Boston Historical Society. "Harper, it's Daniel," said her supervisor when she answered. "I know you're still on leave, but something's come up that I think you should see." His tone made her stomach tighten. "What is it?" "A collection of glass negatives was donated yesterday. They're from a photographer in Salem, circa 1920s. One of them, ... Well, it reminded me of some research you were doing before your leave, about a dentist named Holloway." Harper nearly dropped the phone. "Don't touch them," she said urgently, "especially any that might show a man with an infant." "I'll be right there." She arrived at the Historical Society 30 minutes later, breathless from rushing. Daniel met her at the entrance, looking concerned. "They're in the conservation lab," he explained as they walked. "The donor found them in a wall cavity during renovations of an old building on Essex Street." Harper's blood ran cold. Thomas Holloway's former dental practice. In the lab, a collection of about 20 glass negatives lay in archival trays. Most appeared to be standard portraits and Salem streetscapes, but one was separated from the others. "That's the one that made me think of your research," Daniel said, pointing to it. The cataloger noticed something unusual about the infant. Harper approached cautiously. Even through the negative's reverse tones, she could make out a man holding a baby, similar to the photograph she had tried to restore, but not identical. This appeared to be from the same session, but a different exposure. The infant's face was turned more directly to the camera, and even in negative, the unnatural smile was visible. "We need to secure this immediately," Harper said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "In fact, all of these negatives need to be quarantined until we can determine if they're safe to archive." Daniel looked confused. "Safe? They're just old photographs." "Trust me," Harper insisted. "There are serious conservation concerns." She wasn't ready to tell him the truth, not yet. "I'll document everything properly, but for now these need to be isolated." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, helping Harper seal the negatives in a conservation-grade container as they worked. He mentioned that the donor had found something else with the negatives, a journal belonging to the building's former occupant. The journal was bound in faded black leather, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. According to Daniel, the donor had only skimmed it briefly before deciding it should accompany the negatives to the Historical Society. "He said it contained some disturbing technical notes," Daniel explained as he retrieved the journal from a secure cabinet. "Something about dental procedures that seemed experimental." Harper accepted the journal with gloved hands, her mouth dry. The name embossed on the cover confirmed her fears. Thomas R. Holloway, DDS. "I'd like to examine this privately," she told Daniel, "given my research interests." Once alone in the reading room, Harper carefully opened the journal. The early entries were mundane enough: patient records, notes on dental techniques, and financial accounting from Holloway's practice. But as she progressed through the pages, the content grew increasingly disturbing. April 17, 1923. Catherine is in her 7th month. The preparations are nearly complete. The special instruments have arrived from Germany, and I have collected 16 suitable specimens from patients thus far. Only 16 more needed to complete the set. May 30, 1923. Some of my colleagues question my methods of sedation. They are small minds who cannot comprehend true innovation. The patients remember nothing, and the minor extractions heal quickly. They are contributing to something far greater than they could imagine. Harper felt nauseated as she continued reading. Thomas Holloway had been systematically extracting teeth from his sedated patients, apparently to prepare for some procedure involving his unborn child. The entries following Catherine's death and childbirth were increasingly erratic, filled with diagrams of infant jaw structures and detailed notes on surgical techniques that made Harper's skin crawl. November 3, 1924. The procedure was a success. Elizabeth did not cry even once as I worked. She seems to understand the gift I am giving her. With each implantation, she grows more perfect. Catherine would be so proud. Accompanying this entry was a hand-drawn illustration of an infant's mouth containing adult teeth, meticulously labeled with dates and patient sources for each tooth. The journal chronicled Elizabeth's development over the subsequent years, noting with clinical detachment her difficulties with feeding, her delayed speech, and her unique dietary preferences that emerged around age 4. May 12, 1928, Elizabeth consumed an entire raw beefsteak today with remarkable efficiency. Her dentition functions perfectly, far superior to normal mastication capabilities for a child her age. The secondary row in the upper palate is fully functional now. As the entries progressed into the 1930s, Holloway's pride gave way to concern, then fear. March 7, 1934, neighbor's cat found mutilated. Elizabeth denies involvement, but I found traces of fur between her secondary molars. Must increase supervision. September 19, 1935, the Sanders boy is missing. Authorities questioned everyone in the neighborhood. Elizabeth smiled so sweetly at the police officer. I checked her bedsheets tonight and found blood. God help me, what have I created? The final entries were frantic, documenting Holloway's desperate attempts to correct Elizabeth's condition through various surgical interventions, all unsuccessful. The last entry, dated May 3, 1936, sent chills down Harper's spine. I have failed. 3 children now. I cannot allow this to continue. The special instruments I ordered from Switzerland have arrived. Tonight I will undo what I have done. May God forgive us both. Harper closed the journal, her hands trembling. Thomas Holloway had created a monster through his twisted experiments, then ultimately destroyed his own creation. But clearly, something of Elizabeth had lingered, attached to the photographs that documented her unnatural existence. As Harper sat processing what she had read, her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Did you miss me? I found new pictures to play in. A cold dread settled over her. The binding ritual had destroyed the specific photograph and negative they had found in Eleanor's house. But Elizabeth's spirit had apparently found new vessels in this recently discovered collection. Harper quickly gathered the journal and returned to the conservation lab, where the container of negatives was stored. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, but a young intern was cataloging documents nearby. Has anyone handled these negatives? Harper asked urgently. The intern looked up, startled. No, they're sealed as you requested. But someone from digital archiving did take photographs of them through the container for the preliminary database entry. Standard procedure. Harper's heart sank. Digital photographs? Have they been uploaded to the database yet? Just about 20 minutes ago, the intern confirmed. Is there a problem? Where's the digital archiving office? Harper asked, already moving toward the door. 3rd floor, but Harper didn't wait to hear the rest, rushing to the elevator and repeatedly pressing the button for the 3rd floor. As the doors finally opened, she nearly collided with Daniel. Harper, I was just coming to find you, he said, steadying her. Something strange is happening with the computer system. All the monitors are showing the same image, one of those Holloway negatives. Which one? Harper asked, though she already knew the answer. The one with the baby, Daniel replied, but it's changed somehow. The image keeps getting clearer and there's something wrong with the child's face. Harper pushed past him toward the digital archiving office. Inside, 3 staff members were staring at their monitors, which all displayed the same image. The Holloway negative, but in positive form now. The details becoming sharper with each passing second. On every screen, the infant Elizabeth smiled her terrible smile, her too many teeth gleaming whiter and more distinct with each processing iteration. Shut it down, Harper commanded. The entire network. Now. The Historical Society's IT department worked frantically to isolate the affected computers, but the image had already spread throughout the network. By the time they managed to shut down the main servers, every digital display in the building had shown Elizabeth's unnatural smile, if only briefly. Harper gathered Daniel and the Society's director, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, in the conference room to explain the situation. She couldn't hide the truth any longer, not with Elizabeth's influence spreading through digital means. What you're suggesting is impossible, Dr. Montgomery said after Harper had finished recounting her experiences. Haunted photographs, a child's spirit corrupting digital files? I know how it sounds, Harper acknowledged, but I've seen what Elizabeth can do. My grandmother fought her 60 years ago, and Martin and I barely managed to bind her 3 months ago. Now she's found new anchors in these negatives. Daniel, who had witnessed the strange behavior of the computer systems firsthand, seemed less skeptical, though the image was changing without any user input. I've never seen anything like it, Doctor. Montgomery sighed heavily. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, what do you propose we do? The ritual my grandmother used won't work this time, Harper said. Elizabeth has learned from that experience. And now she's found a way to exist digitally, which makes her much harder to contain. She touched the silver pendant around her neck, remembering her grandmother's note. For protection. We need to find out exactly what Thomas Holloway did to end Elizabeth's physical existence in 1936? The answer might be in his instruments, the ones he mentioned in his final journal entry. And where would those be after nearly 90 years? Dr. Montgomery asked skeptically. The negatives were found in a wall cavity in Holloway's former practice, Harper reasoned. It's possible the instruments were hidden there too. The donor who found the negatives might know. Within the hour, they had contacted the donor, a contractor named Paul Reynolds, who was renovating the old Essex Street building. Reynolds confirmed that they had found a metal case along with the negatives and journal, but had left it in place as it appeared to contain antique medical equipment. Still there as far as I know, Reynolds told them over the phone. In the east wall of what used to be the main office. We were planning to remove it next week when we continue the renovations. Harper, accompanied by Daniel and a reluctant Dr. Montgomery, drove to the Essex Street location immediately. The building was unoccupied, midway through its transformation from retail space back to professional offices. Reynolds met them at the site, leading them to a partially demolished wall where a metal case was visible in a cavity between studs. We spotted it with a scope before opening the wall, he explained. Didn't seem as historically significant as the photographic material, so we left it for now. Harper approached the wall carefully, aware of a strange heaviness in the air, the same oppressive feeling she had experienced in her grandmother's house when Elizabeth's presence was strongest. Be careful, she warned the others. If Elizabeth is aware we're here, she may try to stop us. Reynolds looked confused, but Daniel quickly explained they were concerned about potential chemical contamination from old dental materials. Using a pry bar provided by Reynolds, Harper carefully extracted the metal case from the wall cavity. It was heavier than she expected, roughly the size of a briefcase and sealed with a combination lock. We should take this somewhere secure before attempting to open it, Harper suggested. As they prepared to leave, all the lights in the building flickered simultaneously, then went out, plunging them into near darkness. Reynolds' phone lit up as he attempted to call the power company, but instead of connecting, the screen displayed a message. "She's mine now." "What the hell?" Reynolds muttered, tapping frantically at his unresponsive phone. Harper felt a chill run through her. "She knows we're here. We need to leave. Now." They hurried toward the exit, guided by the dim emergency lights. As they passed through what had once been Holloway's main operating room, a dental chair that had been left by previous tenants as too cumbersome to move began to creak, its ancient hydraulics activating on their own to raise the backrest. "Keep moving," Harper urged, clutching the case tightly. They had almost reached the front door when Harper felt something tug at the case. Looking down, she saw nothing, but the pulling sensation intensified, as if invisible hands were trying to wrest it from her grasp. "Help me," she called to Daniel, who grabbed the case as well, adding his strength to hers. The unseen force responded by increasing its efforts. The case vibrated violently between them, its combination lock spinning wildly. Harper's silver pendant suddenly grew warm against her skin. On impulse, she pressed it against the case. There was a sound like a child's scream, high-pitched and furious, and the invisible pulling ceased abruptly. They burst through the front door into the late afternoon sunlight, all breathing heavily from the encounter. "What just happened in there?" Reynolds demanded, looking from Harper to the case with wide eyes. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you," Daniel said, his face pale. "Okay." Back at the Historical Society, they secured a private room to examine the case. Harper's pendant had left a scorched mark on its surface where she had pressed it against the metal. "The combination lock is a problem," Daniel observed. "We could try to force it, but that might damage whatever's inside." Harper studied the lock carefully. "These usually have 3 numbers. Let me try something." She dialed 317, the numbers that had repeatedly appeared in connection with Elizabeth, the time of her death, the address of her father's practice. The lock clicked open. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, was a set of dental instruments unlike any Harper had ever seen. Their design was elaborate, almost ceremonial, with intricate symbols etched into the metal handles, symbols that matched those on Harper's pendant. Beneath the instruments was a slim volume bound in red leather. The title embossed in gold read, "Odontomancy, the Sacred Geometry of Dentition." Harper carefully opened the book, discovering it was written in Latin with extensive diagrams showing teeth arranged in various patterns. Many pages had been annotated in what she recognized as Thomas Holloway's handwriting. "This is no ordinary dental text," she said, scanning the pages. "It's some kind of occult manual disguised as a dental treatise." Dr. Montgomery, who had been skeptical throughout, peered over Harper's shoulder at the book. "That symbol there," she said, pointing to a diagram, "I've seen it in our restricted archives. It's associated with a European cult that believes certain body parts could house secondary souls." Harper continued flipping through the pages until she found a section heavily annotated by Holloway. The diagrams showed an infant's jaw being modified to accommodate additional teeth, with notes about anchoring points for spiritual essence. He wasn't just giving her extra teeth, Harper realized with horror. He was creating a vessel for something else, something he was trying to bring into this world. The final pages contained what appeared to be a reversal procedure, with Holloway's desperate notes crammed into the margins: must extract in precise order. The binding essence will resist. Silver instruments essential to sever connection. Harper looked up at Daniel and Dr. Montgomery. Thomas Holloway used these instruments to create Elizabeth and then later to destroy her physical form. But her spirit remained connected to her image in the photographs. So what do we do? Daniel asked. We can't exactly perform dental surgery on a digital image. Harper thought about what she had learned from her grandmother's ritual and Holloway's journal. The photographs and negatives are still anchors for her, physical objects she's connected to, and now she's extending herself through digital copies of those images. She picked up one of the silver instruments, a delicate probe with symbols etched along its length. We need to adapt Holloway's reversal procedure for the photographic materials. The silver disrupts her connection, as we saw with my pendant. Over the next hours, Harper studied both Holloway's book and her grandmother's journal, which Daniel retrieved from her apartment. By midnight, she had formulated a plan. The ritual needs to be performed at 3:17 a.m., using these silver instruments to physically alter both the glass negatives and any digital storage devices containing her image, she explained. The pattern of markings has to match the arrangement Holloway used to extract her teeth. This is insanity, Dr. Montgomery muttered. But after witnessing the events at the Essex Street building, she didn't try to stop them. As the appointed hour approached, they gathered in the conservation lab. The negatives were arranged in a specific pattern based on Holloway's diagrams, surrounded by the Society's main server and several affected hard drives. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Harper began the ritual, reciting Latin phrases from Holloway's book while using the silver instruments to make precise marks on the negatives and digital devices, following the pattern that mirrored Elizabeth's unnatural dentition. As she worked, the air in the lab grew increasingly cold. Frost formed on the negatives and the computer equipment emitted strange, distorted sounds that might have been a child's voice, twisted and angry. She's resisting, Harper said through chattering teeth, continuing the procedure. The lights flickered violently and one of the negatives cracked with a sound like breaking bone. A high-pitched keening filled the room, building in intensity until they all covered their ears in pain. Harper forced herself to continue, making the final marks with the silver probe. As she completed the pattern, the keening abruptly stopped. The negatives simultaneously shattered into fine powder, and the digital devices sparked and went dark. In the sudden silence, they could hear a sound like distant, receding footsteps, followed by what might have been a child's sigh. "Is it over?" Daniel whispered after several minutes had passed. Harper touched her pendant, which had grown cold during the ritual but now returned to normal temperature. "I think so. We've severed her connections to this world." The next morning they verified that all digital copies of Elizabeth's image had been corrupted beyond recovery. The database entries showed only static where her photograph had been, and attempts to recover the files were unsuccessful. Harper donated her grandmother's journal and the Holloway materials to the Historical Society's restricted archives, with strict protocols for their handling. She resumed her position at the Society but insisted on new safeguards for handling potentially problematic photographic materials. 6 months later, at a small ceremony honoring Eleanor's contributions to historical preservation, Harper unveiled a special exhibit, The Ethics of Restoration, Knowing When to Let the Past Rest. The centerpiece was a sealed display containing the silver instruments and fragments of Thomas Holloway's journal, carefully edited to exclude the most dangerous information. As visitors examined the exhibit, none noticed the small silver pendant Harper wore, or the faint mark it had left on her skin, a reminder that some things from the past should remain undisturbed, their smiles forever hidden in the darkness where they belong.